Why did Rome fall? The real reasons behind the collapse of the greatest empire. September 4th, AD 476. The sky above Ravenna looked no different from countless other days. Merchants opened their shops, craftsmen began their work, and soldiers stood guard at the city gates. Yet behind the walls of the imperial palace, an event was unfolding that later generations would remember as the end of an era. The young emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was forced to surrender his throne. The Germanic military leader Odoacer accepted the imperial insignia and sent them to Constantinople. The Western Roman Empire had ceased to exist. At least, that is how history usually tells the story. But did Rome truly fall in a single day? Or had its collapse begun centuries earlier? Historians have debated this question for hundreds of years. The paradox is extraordinary. One of the greatest empires in human history was not destroyed in a single battle. There was no final, world-shattering conflict that brought everything to an end. No single catastrophe erased Rome from the map. Instead, the empire faded slowly, sometimes almost imperceptibly. And that is precisely what makes Rome's fall one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. An empire unlike any other. During the 2nd century AD, Rome stood at the height of its power. Under Emperor Trajan, the empire stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. Tens of millions of people lived under Roman rule. Thousands of miles of roads connected hundreds of cities. Aqueducts carried fresh water across vast distances. Merchant ships crossed the Mediterranean in every direction. Roman law governed an immense territory. The legions defended frontiers stretching for thousands of kilometers. To those living at the time, the empire seemed eternal. Even neighboring peoples regarded Rome as an unshakable force, an empire that could never truly fall. Yet it was during this very period of unmatched strength that the first signs of future decline quietly began to appear. An empire too large to govern. The larger Rome became, the more difficult it was to control. Every new province required governors, soldiers, roads, fortifications, and a constant flow of supplies. Legions had to defend Britain, the Rhine, the Danube, North Africa, Syria, and countless other frontiers, all at the same time. Whenever a major invasion occurred, troops had to travel enormous distances. Even the emperor's orders often took weeks to reach distant provinces. In an age without railroads, telegraphs, or modern communications, governing such a vast empire became an extraordinary challenge. Most historians do not consider Rome's immense size to be the sole reason for its collapse. However, they agree that managing such an enormous state became increasingly difficult as new internal and external pressures emerged. The crisis of the 3rd century. Then came one of the darkest chapters in Roman history. Between AD 235 and 284, the empire experienced decades of political chaos. Emperors rose and fell with astonishing speed. Many were murdered by their own soldiers. Increasingly, it was the army, not the Senate, that decided who would wear the imperial crown. Meanwhile, powerful enemies threatened Rome's borders. Germanic tribes intensified their attacks along the Rhine and Danube. In the east, the powerful Sasanian Empire challenged Roman dominance. At the same time, the empire faced serious economic instability. To finance the growing military and administrative costs, Roman authorities gradually reduced the silver content of their coins. As the currency lost value, prices rose rapidly. Trade declined in many regions. Several prosperous cities entered periods of economic stagnation. Although the reforms of Diocletian and Constantine the Great later restored a measure of stability, the crisis exposed how vulnerable the empire had become. The diseases that changed history. Another factor has received increasing attention from modern historians. Disease. During the 2nd century, the empire suffered the devastating Antonine Plague. In the 3rd century came the Plague of Cyprian. Researchers continue debating the exact diseases responsible, but most agree their impact was profound. Large numbers of deaths meant fewer farmers, fewer taxpayers, fewer recruits for the Roman army. Some cities experienced dramatic population decline. Economic production weakened even further. Although epidemics alone did not destroy the Roman Empire, they greatly intensified the challenges it already faced. The barbarians at the gates. The Romans used the word barbarian to describe many peoples living beyond the empire's borders: the Goths, the Franks, the Alemanni, the Vandals, the Burgundians. For centuries, Rome's relationship with these groups had been complex. Some traded peacefully with the empire. Others served within the Roman army. Still others launched raids across the frontier. Everything changed dramatically during the late 4th century. A new power appeared in Europe: the Huns. Their rapid expansion pushed many Germanic peoples toward Roman territory in search of safety. In AD 376, large groups of Goths were permitted to cross the Danube and settle inside the empire. Roman officials, however, failed to provide adequate supplies or manage the migration effectively. Tensions quickly escalated. Rebellion followed. Then came disaster. In AD 378, at the Battle of Adrianople, the Roman army suffered one of the worst defeats in its entire history. Emperor Valens was killed during the fighting. For many historians, Adrianople marked a turning point. The military system that had protected Rome for centuries was no longer invincible. The division of the empire. By the end of the 4th century, governing the empire had become so difficult that imperial administration was permanently divided between East and West. Initially, this decision improved efficiency, but it also widened the differences between the two halves. The Eastern Empire possessed wealthier cities, stronger tax revenues, thriving trade routes. The Western Empire faced heavier military expenses and a weaker economic foundation. As time passed, the gap continued to grow. This helps explain one of history's greatest paradoxes. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in AD 476, the Eastern Roman Empire, known today as the Byzantine Empire, continued to survive for nearly another 1,000 years. A mystery that still has no single answer. The more historians study Rome's fall, the clearer one fact becomes. There was never a single cause, no single battle, no single emperor, no single invading people brought down the greatest empire of the ancient world. Instead, Rome gradually weakened under the combined weight of political instability, economic hardship, devastating epidemics, military defeats, and long-term structural changes that accumulated over generations. Yet one question remains. Perhaps it is the most important question of all. Why did an empire that had survived so many previous crises fail to recover this time? The year was AD 410. For nearly 8 centuries, the city of Rome had stood as the symbol of power, wealth, and invincibility. Generations believed the eternal city could never be conquered. Then the impossible happened. The Visigoths, led by King Alaric, entered Rome. For 3 days, they looted the city. Churches were spared whenever possible, but palaces, homes, and public buildings were stripped of their treasures. The psychological shock was enormous. Although Rome was no longer the political capital of the Western Empire, its fall shattered an illusion that had lasted for centuries. If Rome itself could be captured, perhaps the empire was no longer eternal. The final blow, the sack of Rome in AD 410, was only the beginning. Just 45 years later, another catastrophe struck. In AD 455, the Vandals crossed the Mediterranean from North Africa and captured the city once again. For 2 weeks, Rome was systematically plundered. Ancient writers describe ships loaded with gold, silver, priceless statues, and imperial treasures sailing toward Carthage. Among the treasures may even have been sacred objects taken centuries earlier from the Temple of Jerusalem. Many of these riches have never been found. Their fate remains one of history's greatest archaeological mysteries. The empire was growing weaker with every passing decade. An emperor without an empire. By the middle of the 5th century, Western Roman emperors ruled little beyond parts of Italy. Many provinces had already fallen under the control of Germanic kingdoms. Britain had been abandoned. Most of Gaul was lost. Spain was divided. North Africa, the empire's richest source of grain and tax revenue, had been conquered by the Vandals. Without African grain and taxes, the Western government struggled to pay its armies. The empire still possessed an emperor, but it no longer possessed the resources that had once sustained Roman power. The last emperor. In AD 475, a young boy became emperor. His name was Romulus Augustulus. Ironically, his name combined that of Rome's legendary founder, Romulus, and its first emperor, Augustus. He was probably no older than 15. Real power rested not in his hands, but in those of military commanders. Only 1 year later, Germanic troops serving in the Roman army demanded land in Italy as payment for their service. When their request was refused, they rebelled. Their leader was Odoacer. He defeated the imperial forces and entered Ravenna. Rather than executing the young emperor, Odoacer forced him to abdicate. Romulus Augustulus disappeared from history, likely living the rest of his life in quiet retirement. No new Western emperor was appointed. Instead, Odoacer acknowledged the authority of the Eastern emperor in Constantinople while ruling Italy himself. For later historians, this moment marked the traditional end of the Western Roman Empire. Did Rome really fall? Surprisingly, many modern historians answer this question with a simple word: no. The city of Rome continued to exist. Its people continued speaking Latin. Roman law survived. Roman roads remained in use. Aqueducts still carried water in many regions. The Christian Church preserved Roman administration, education, and written culture. Even the so-called barbarian kings often adopted Roman customs, Roman titles, and Roman legal traditions. In many ways, the Roman world did not disappear overnight. It evolved. The political empire collapsed, but Roman civilization endured. The empire that refused to die. While the West struggled, the Eastern Roman Empire remained remarkably strong. Its capital, Constantinople, possessed immense wealth, powerful defensive walls, and thriving international trade. The empire continued calling itself Roman. Its citizens called themselves Romans. Its emperors regarded themselves as the legitimate successors of Augustus and Trajan. Today, we refer to this state as the Byzantine Empire. Yet that name was invented centuries later. To its own people, it was simply the Roman Empire. It survived for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of the West. Only in 1453, When Constantinople was captured by the Ottoman Turks, did the last Roman emperor disappear from history? In that sense, Rome did not survive 500 years. It survived almost 1,500. What archaeology reveals today. Modern archaeology has transformed our understanding of Rome's decline. For generations, many believed barbarian invasions simply destroyed civilization. The evidence tells a more complex story. Excavations reveal that many Roman cities continued to function for centuries after the empire's political collapse. Some public buildings were abandoned, others were repaired and reused. Trade continued, although on a smaller scale. Coins remained in circulation. Churches were built inside former Roman forums. Ancient villas became medieval settlements. Rather than a sudden catastrophe, archaeology often reveals a slow process of transformation that unfolded over generations. History did not end. It changed. Why historians still debate Rome's fall, few events have inspired as much debate. Some historians emphasize economic decline. Others point to political instability. Some argue that repeated civil wars weakened the empire more than foreign invasions ever could. Others highlight climate change, disease, demographic shifts, or military overextension. Each theory explains part of the story. None explains all of it. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire was not caused by a single event. It resulted from many crises interacting over centuries. That complexity is precisely why historians continue studying Rome today. Rome's greatest legacy. When people think of Rome, they often imagine armies, emperors, and conquest. Yet Rome's greatest achievement may have been something far more enduring. Its legal system influenced countless modern nations. Its roads shaped European trade for centuries. Its engineering inspired generations of builders. Its language evolved into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Its ideas about government, citizenship, architecture, and administration still echo throughout the modern world. The empire vanished. Its influence did not. The greatest mystery. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not why Rome fell. Perhaps it is why Rome still surrounds us. Every time we cross an arched bridge, walk along an ancient road, read words derived from Latin, or enter a building crowned with Roman columns, we encounter the legacy of an empire that officially ended more than 15 centuries ago. Its armies disappeared. Its emperors are long forgotten. Its palaces became ruins. Yet its civilization continues to shape our world in ways most people never notice. And perhaps that is the most extraordinary secret of all. Rome did not simply vanish into history. In many ways, it never truly left.